Everybody, I just want to take this minute to introduce Shauna Hong, who's here from Student Mental Health Services, and her talk dovetails and complements really well with Kimberly's because she's going to talk a little bit about, or a lot about, trauma-informed teaching. And I think we're all, I don't know if you guys feel it, I have a little something going on in my body emotionally having listened to that. And that's, I know, is just a very, very minor sense of response compared to some of the experiences that our students who have had lived experiences, haven't been involved in protests, are going through this summer. So Shauna, why don't you say hi, and let's have Kimberly and Shauna, you know, let's create some space to say some words and about our responses to what we just watched.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessica. If someone could make me a co-host, that would be great. I do have some slides that I'll share during this portion.
So I've been seeing a lot of things talking of the people making.
All right, so thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Shauna Olson-Hong. I'm the Director of Counseling Services at Student Health and Counseling, and here to talk a little bit about trauma-informed teaching strategies. And I think Kimberly does a great job setting up why we need to have this discussion in terms of that our students are experiencing a lot right now. Many different pandemics are hitting them all at the same time, and that we need to both be aware of that and how that affects them as learners, and we also need to think about how that informs us as instructors. So let's start maybe by putting into the chat, I think Kim talked a lot about this, but thinking about the particular things that are impacting our students right now, and that will continue to impact them when they come back to campus. What is the socio-political environment? What are the things that students are experiencing that might make it difficult for them to focus on academics as they're coming back to us? So just go ahead and put it into the chat.
And also, I guess, if they have responses to the video as well.
Yes.
If you could, please, because Shauna's really good. And what I would ask you all on top of that is, again, any kind of reaction and talking through, and this, again, grounds in what Shauna's talking about. There's trauma, there is hurt, there is overwhelm, there's all these things that came out of that, at least, you know, things that I feel when I listen to that. But that's part, and it resonates with me because much of it is lived experience. But what do you do when that shows up in your classroom without causing further harm? What language, what can you do, especially if you're on Zoom? And Shauna's really great at helping us think through that. No pressure.
Yeah, but I think that's true. And I know for myself, yes, every time I hear that video, I just need to take some breaths. I just need to move my body a little bit. I just need to take a second to sit with the emotion that pours out of Kimberly Jones, that pours out of me when I listen to her. So feel free to take that moment, take that stretch as you're thinking about how to put words to what you experience when you listen to her. And again, there's so much that's in our chat right now, but just putting this into the context of, I think our eyes are being opened, maybe much of our country's eyes are being opened to the pandemic of racism in our country and our history. Some for the first time, some have known this for a long time. And then also really concrete concerns about economics, about health, physical health and mental health, right? Relationships, as folks have been sheltering in place together, and a lot of fear about those relationships, about the welfare of the people that we care about. And then this larger context, political context that we're in right now. So I think just as there is so much that pours out of us when we think about these questions, there's a lot that our students are also experiencing, wrestling with, and thinking about right now. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to think about how do we teach them, knowing what is pouring out of us, knowing what is pouring out of them in this moment. So some of the key factors, again, that came out as we were going through the chat exercise are in these categories of thinking about health and wellness, thinking about our relationships as students have been sheltering in place with family members, thinking about economics. You know, a lot of students have lost their jobs. A lot of students are in families where folks have lost their jobs, and there's a lot of fear about what that's going to look like long term. And then all these political factors that we've been talking about. So this is the context of why the students that you will greet in the fall are different students than the ones you said goodbye to at the end of the spring. And when we think about trauma-informed teaching, let's first think about what is trauma. And so the definition of trauma is that it's a psychological response to a distressing or threatening situation that tends to overwhelm our normal coping strategies, right? So it could be a one-time event, and I think of the difference between the Northern California fires that we had a couple years ago that were terrifying, but also discrete events that came and then stopped, and then we dealt with the aftermath, versus COVID, you know, a pandemic that is ongoing, where there's no end in sight, and we're just not sure what's going to happen next, but we're just living in it and continuing to live in it and continuing to be re-traumatized daily. So there's a difference between a one-time experience and then accumulation of experiences over time. So the types of things that we're thinking about as we're thinking about people's backgrounds, the backgrounds of the students that we're serving, we think about what's called in the psychology field adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So those could be exposure to violence when they're growing up, that could be persistent poverty, that could be experiences of abuse, that could be the chronic illness or loss of a family member as their children, right? It could be a one-time thing, or it could be an ongoing thing that they grew up with. And either of those leaves an impact. So ongoing trauma means that children learn certain survival strategies, and so it affects their behavior. It affects their relationships and how they learn to relate to one another. And it also affects their brain chemistry, their body chemistry. If they have stress hormones constantly flowing through their bodies, that's going to leave a biological mark and impact their health outcomes for the rest of their lives. And so just knowing that, you might not ever know what exactly the traumas are for your students, but you might be able to observe there's something going on. There's something going on that their reaction to this feels like they're not just reacting to whatever's happening in my classroom right now, or whatever's happening in the world right now even, but there's this outsized reaction that probably means this is linked into something else that they've experienced and are still surviving and living through. So they might be reacting to the present trauma, but also remembering and re-experiencing things that they've lived through in the past. And just recognizing that there are certain, again, survival strategies that people use that we can look at from the outside and think, that doesn't make sense to me, or in this context, we can even judge it as that's not appropriate. And so, for example, it can affect how students interact with the police. You know, when the police come in the classroom, you might look at them as, you know, these are friendly, I know these officers, I know they do a good job, but students could have a very different response to seeing someone in uniform on campus or coming into the classroom because of their past experiences and their feelings about police officers. Trauma can also affect our help-seeking behavior. And so are we willing to look for services? Are we willing to say, this is what I need? Are we willing to trust people with personal information? Those are all things that can be really impacted by our past experiences with systems that were meant to help us, but which didn't, right? And so these things that you might observe in your students and think that's weird or that's not healthy, and judge those things, just kind of put them in a context of, I wonder what the student has experienced, that's how they see our services on campus, and why are they so slow to trust and open up to me or open up to services or receive help. There could be reasons for all of those things. So let's think a little bit about how we are called to recalibrate our responses as instructors. So first of all, trauma-informed teaching means thinking not about a punitive response, first of all, but a restorative response. What does the student need in order to be restored to right learning, restored to right relationships? How can I support them? And there's a fundamental question that changes from the initial question that we might default to is, what's wrong with this student? Why are they like this? Why are they behaving like this? Why are they so aggressive, right? Thinking even about if we had just seen the end of that Kimberly Jones video without the context of where she was or why, the context of the history that she knows and is speaking to, people might see the end of that video as just like, wow, she's really aggressive. Why is she so angry, right? Without understanding the context. But when we see the whole video, when we know that it was recorded after a day of participating in protests, right, on the ground, then we start to understand there's something that she has experienced today and throughout her life that puts this in a context of like, of course, now I understand her passion and her energy and why this is so important to her, right? And I think that really changes how you would respond to her if she brought that energy and that discussion to your classroom, right? Maybe not just, this is inappropriate, let's save this for another time, what are you talking about, this is going to stir up too much, this is not what we're talking about today, but able to really hold and honor the learning that she's bringing, the life experience that she's bringing, and the things that she needs to hear from instructors or from other students in order to feel heard and supported and understood in her lived experience. So changing the discussion from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. And then the next thing we think about for trauma-informed instruction is an eye toward building resilience and building community, again, in order to be restorative and give students the support that they need. And Kim Baber-Flowers and I have had some really helpful discussions about resilience because it's something that we teach a lot about in the counseling center. And so that has helped me get a little more nuanced in how we teach about resilience. So again, thinking about resilience as your ability to face challenges and keep going, right? To persevere in the face of hardship, but also putting that in the context of structural oppression. And so knowing that there are a lot of people that have the qualities that we talk about when we talk about resilience, and so they persevere and they work hard and they keep going, and they're resourceful and they're creative and they're passionate, and they also get crushed by these structures of oppression through no fault of their own, right? So making sure that we're putting the context and the onus where it belongs, that it is no one individual's ability or charge to overcome every hardship that they should face. Structural inequities and communal problems require structural and communal solutions. And so that's part of our charge as instructors and as parts of our community to make sure that we're addressing those larger issues and making sure that they don't just rest on the shoulders of those individual students. And so if you're interested, Student Health and Counseling has been recording some videos that are designed for students, but I'll put one into the chat. So this is a video that I recorded after talking with Kim about resilience. And so it's just a video about resilience and how to put it in the larger context of what we're experiencing right now, but also support students as they're thinking about, even in the midst of these structures that many are experiencing, how can I still be intentional and grow my own resilience and think about the things that are going to serve me and strengthen me right now. So core values of trauma-informed care. First of all, we think about the hierarchy of needs, right, that Maslow wrote about so long ago. We think about, are we physically safe? Are we emotionally safe, right? And we'll talk a little more specifically about how you can create more physical and emotional safety in your classroom environments. But that is just going to be a prerequisite to any other relationship building, but also any learning that you want students to do in your classrooms. We think about trustworthiness. Do they see you as an instructor and you as the authority in the classroom as somebody they can trust? We think about the student's own sense of choice and control. Do they feel like they have a say and they have some measure to make their voice heard in your classroom? We think about collaboration and we think about empowerment. So I'm going to move us forward to some examples of what each of those things might look like in the classroom. So for physical and emotional safety, we think about things like time for checking in and processing, and just acknowledging there's a larger context to each of their lives. There's a larger context in our nation to what we're facing right now. And then offering support and directing toward resources. So acknowledging that students are a whole person, and some of that might need some help, right? And I'll give lots of resources at the end of this and in the slides, but just acknowledging that there are economic factors, there are mental health factors, there are physical health factors that students are facing. And again, that they're not going to be able to focus on the learning that you want to give them until they feel like they have some support or some resourcing in those things. We think about trustworthiness, and sometimes that means thinking about how much of your own story that you want to share with them, just to let them know, I too am a person going through a pandemic, and so I am also struggling, or I also have some things to say about that, without taking the focus away from the students and what they need. So sharing in such a way that I just want to build relationship, I want to become fully human for them, I want to be somebody that's accessible and somebody that they can relate to, but I'm still focused on them. So I'm not going to take the whole class period, talking about my personal struggles and stories. When we think about choice and control, we think about a lot of the things that Kim was sharing about in terms of what technology do students have access to? What do they prefer, right? Not putting additional burdens or assuming that students have access to things that they might not have, and allowing some options for how students engage in your classroom material. We think about co-constructing classes, and so really finding out what are the students interested in, passionate about, what are the things that they are learning about outside the classroom that you can bring in then to inform and infuse the teaching that you're doing. And then we think about flexibility. I think so much of the writing about teaching right now is about not making things harder than they need to be. So really thinking about what are my priorities that I need them to learn from this content, and what are the things that maybe aren't as much of a priority. So if we get to it, that would be great. But if I need to make room for some other things, I can also do that, right? Being flexible with assignments, being flexible with expectations, knowing that we are daily experiencing a lot of things, and sometimes we need to adjust our plan in order to get through. So, I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and then we'll have an opportunity to either ask questions or to interact in a Google document that's coming up. But a few things that you can think about on prevention on the front end is just, again, creating a safe community. So normalizing that there is a context that we are all living in right now. Making space for intentional community, so just having a little time to check in some way in your classroom times or in your office hours, or just asking about something other than the classwork and their identity as a student, to build that community, both between you and the students and between the students themselves. Making support resources available even before they're needed. So there's no stigma of a student having to say, is there a food pantry on campus? Can you tell me where that is? Just putting it in your syllabus, just putting it out there all the time so that there is no barrier to students knowing about that and accessing it. Making extra efforts to be available, providing stability as much as possible, modeling gratefulness and grace. And this is something that I would really, again, recommend on that trustworthiness piece of being a full person and just letting people know I am adjusting too, I am making mistakes too. And so these are some things that I'm doing. I need it as much as you do. And then assigning and modeling time to take care of themselves, right? And modeling that you need that too. So I'm going to go ahead and put that document into the chat as well. These are some pleasant activities that we came up with that students and staff and faculty can do during shelter in place. So this could be a jumping off point of something that you share with your classes and say, do one of these things, this week, choose something that works for you. And then if you hear about a student who is struggling or in distress, being responsive to students who reach out, but also being aware who's not reaching out. and who is not just not reaching out, but not able to show up to my classes, trying to be aware of who's not in the Zoom, who is not able to do the work that you're assigning or show up to the classes, and what might be going on for them, and making an extra effort to reach out and connect with them, or letting other folks on campus who might be connected with them know what's going on. Reiterating campus supports frequently, and then also understanding, again, the context for mistakes and missteps. So why might something be happening? Why did that assignment get missed? Why is that student not showing up as their best selves in this class? And then we have a lot of resources available. So again, you'll get these slides, and the links are in the slides, but all these resources that we have on campus. And I'll direct you especially to our Helping Students in Distress workshops. These are workshops that myself and our Pioneers for Hope coordinator, and then our conventional advocate who works with students affected by sexual assault. The three of us do these workshops to talk about the specific services that we offer to the campus, how you can pick up signs that students might need one of our services, and then how you can bridge them over and connect them with us. So we're going to be offering one of those workshops during Back to the Bay, and then we'll be offering them several other times during the year. So I really encourage you to come to one of those. We'll probably record one and post it so that folks can have the information. But even if you have attended one of those workshops in the past, the information of what our services are in this time, it has changed. I think especially Pioneers for Hope, our Basic Needs initiative, is always transforming as they respond to different needs. And so it's a great workshop to participate in and just hear the latest about what is being offered on campus. So I'll pause there. Do folks have, I know there's a ton of stuff in the chat, I haven't read it, I'm sorry, I'll go back and read it now. But if there are questions that you have, or I'm gonna put a link into the chat that is for a Google document that we can all interact with right now. And so this is just a best practices brainstorm that you can open up right now. And it has a section for each of these questions. How can I create safe community in my classroom? How can I empower students to have more of a sense of choice and control? And how can I collaborate and co-create my classes with students? So go ahead and open that document and start to put in your ideas. We'll give everybody access to not only the document that you all put together today, but the other two that have been done by past cohorts. There is a lot of gold, amazing ideas in these chats. And so it'll be a great document for you to interact with afterward. And then feel free to unmute if you have a question you want to ask either myself or Kim during this time. And I'm going to go ahead and look through the chat and see if there's, I'm sure, a lot of questions that you've been asking. But I didn't. All right, so I see one question in the chat about resources for domestic violence locally. If it's a Cal State East-based student, I would recommend sending them to our confidential advocate. She works for Bay Area Women Against Rape, and she has, so she can provide direct support, but she can also think with students about other resources they might have, including legal resources. And so let me put her. Her information in the chat. And then somebody else asked about the CARE report. So let me put that in the chat as well. You can always just Google CSUEB CARES. And then it brings you to actually a really nice webpage that has a variety of resources for students, for faculty and staff, and then for community members. And it also has the link to the CARE report on that page. All right, and I see a lot of great stuff being put into the Google document. And this will be available to you after the session as well. Any other questions that folks want to put into the chat or unmute themselves and ask while we're all together? I really agree with what Erica's saying in the chat in terms of the power of your relationship with students. You don't need to be a trained counselor in order to be present and curious and supportive, or to know which direction to offer them in terms of other campus resources. And that is 90% of what students are looking for when they say, I'm having a problem. Really what they want is to be heard, and to be heard by you because they're opening up to you. And so taking that opportunity to make time to listen, to say, I'm so sorry this is happening. I hear you, I care about you. And even if in the moment you don't have the answer to what's the next resource, saying, let me get back to you. But now that you've heard about some of the resources, you'll have them in these slides. You can say, did you know that there's a counseling center on campus? Did you know that you've paid for sessions there out of your registration? And so it's available to you. Do you know they have a lot of groups and workshops that might be helpful for these things that you're talking about? Let me give you the information so that you can follow up with them. Did you know that we have a basic needs? We have a food pantry on campus. We have a lot of resources that they can point you to. Do you want to go with a friend? I know a lot of students that have used these services. Sharing authentically about your experience with any of these services or your experiences with counselors, with Doris, our Pioneers for Hope person, with Lorraine, our confidential advocate. Just if you say this is a person that I've met, students are automatically going to trust that person a lot more, right? Our campus is super relational. So if you are a person that they trust and you say, I also trust this other person, they're going to say, okay, well, maybe I'll give it a chance. And so that's the way a lot of our referrals happen, actually, is by a faculty member who's already trusted by the student saying, let me connect you with this other person, and then they form that other relationship. Yes, perfect. Yes, and it is true that there is no additional cost for coming to most services at the Student Health and Counseling Center. It's covered by the fees they've already paid. And so if they don't use our services, they're still going to have to pay that fee. So especially right now, students should be taking advantage of every single thing that they get. And we're still available, even though a lot of things are happening remotely. We're here, the center is actually open for medical appointments in person 1 day a week for students that need that. And then we're offering a lot of counseling groups, workshops remotely. So we are here and we are available. We also have a lot of stuff on our website in terms of mental health supports. And so you can direct students to those videos, you can direct them to, we have a lot of online resources in terms of podcasts, apps, that kind of thing. We're doing a lot on social media because we know the need right now is tremendous. So we're trying to be very creative with how we reach out and resource our students. And Bridget has a great question about emphasizing student capacity and power while also hearing their pain. I do think that sometimes feels like a fine line to walk. And so when we talk about resilience, we don't want to say it doesn't matter because it all makes you stronger and you're going to be great. And, after a while, you'll thank the Lord that you have these experiences. Not true. Trauma leaves an impact even when we overcome it. It still leaves an impact that needs to be attended to. And so just really hearing, this is really painful. You've been through so much. And I'm amazed at the ways that you have managed to survive. Let's think about that. What resources have you been using internally in your support system that have kept you going? Are those still working for you? What other ones can I offer to you that you might not know about or have? Students want to be encouraged. They want to be heard that their pain is real, but they also want to be encouraged that they can get through it and that there are other resources they can use to overcome. So I don't think those two messages have to be in conflict. Anything else for me or for Kim? All right, and one other thing I wanted to say is that both Kim and myself are available. You know our names and therefore you know our email addresses, and so please reach out to us. If there are big questions you have about all the topics we talked about, I know that we've thrown a lot of content at you and a lot to chew on. Reach out to us if you want to talk more, or if there's a particular situation with a student that comes up, please feel free to reach out to us and just say, I need some guidance, I need a thought partner of how to deal with this. We're available for that as well.
I just thought we could talk for a minute about the question that Elizabeth raised in the chat, because it kind of ties the talk that you guys gave together with a lot of the content that we've been going over for the last few days. And Kimberly, it reminds me of the issues with regard to once we go distance learning, which students seem to respond best to which modalities. And I'll paraphrase it, and then maybe Kimberly wants to chime in. Elizabeth, one of the things that we found that Dr. Luke Wood and I think it's Frank Harris, Dr. Frank Harris have found is that when it comes to distance education, asynchronous seems to fail African American male, Latinx male, and AAPI males and Indigenous males. And that then makes another issue for us to consider, because we thought that if we were taking away the Zooms and being less synchronous, we were making things more accessible. So finding this high flex balance and also surveying your students periodically, using that Google Form survey and finding out what their technology obstacles are, what their technology likes are, what their technology abilities are. And then it does ask something of us, and then offering alternatives to students, and maybe being there for, maybe you put your lectures on a video, but maybe you are there flexibly for some Zoom group office hours so that students who need high touch can find high touch in your digital classroom, in your virtual classroom, and just being aware and intentional. So the purpose of this institute wasn't pick from this buffet of bedazzling technologies and wow your students. The point is to think about your learning outcomes, to try and get a sense of who your students are as the semester approaches, and then make best choices for that moment and that knowledge, and then use temperature taking and other forms of formative feedback on the teaching and the class and how the students are doing, just even checking for their understanding, and maybe readapt and come see us again and talk to some of us. And Shauna and Kimberly, if you want to respond to that too.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, it's this balancing act, and it's a very thin line of how do you provide and include all. I don't know if any of y'all have seen the sociology data that came out, but many of our students have said they don't like this particular modality. They're not doing well. The data, at least anecdotally, that Frank Harris and Jay Lukewood have shared around asynchronous and synchronous learning for males of color especially is playing out at East Bay. We had faculty who reported that, you know, one faculty member said she had 3 or 4 African-American males in her classroom who she felt she was losing and couldn't figure out how to get them re-engaged because this online thing was not working out. So she went up to campus and actually helped to tutor them so she wouldn't lose them. I know that's extreme, but for those of you who've heard me say this before, sorry, but I live in a house with a 19 and 20-year-old African-American males who are both sophomores at community college and lost one, and the other one is my son. And the only reason he's continuing on to the fall is because I'm bribing him with helping out with his car payment to get him to go because they've checked out. They don't learn well. My son is dyslexic. He is a kinesthetic learner. He needs to be in it, and it's all he can do to stay engaged. So Jessica has talked in other spaces around, you know, flipped classrooms, figuring out ways to make it interactive in that moment may actually be helpful. Because right now, at least for the males of color that I live with and others I've talked to, this is extremely challenging. And it's all we can do to keep them engaged.
Specifically the asynchronous stuff or just having it be all remote?
From anecdotally for me, it's the asynchronous. So in that sociology report, and through some of the qualitative data we've gathered, a lot of our students said, you know, when we first went on, many of their faculty just kind of disappeared. So many faculty said, okay, read this and we'll check back in 2 weeks. Or many faculty said, you know, read this, take notes, shoot me pictures of it, and then we'll do a quiz. I mean, it's this kind of arm's length. And that had impact on many of our students. I would just advocate for more intentional kind of engagement because some of the stories that our students have told, we can't afford. Our students are predominantly students of color. We cannot afford. And if you see the data just in normal circumstances between, you know, how many we retain from semester to semester, we cannot afford to lose our students. It's no.
And also to think about, you know, what is synchronous? We've talked about this in the different parts of the Institute. What is synchronous instruction good for? If we're using synchronous instruction primarily to deliver what could be a video lecture, even synchronously, a student might not feel connected, might not feel part of a community. And so one of the things we want to think about is when we are, remember that graphic image, right, with the red for the Zoom meetings, when we are, you know, asking for this high immediacy, high bandwidth, high value moment, make it high value. And that's going to be those breakout groups. And it's going to have maybe 10 minutes of check-in time before moving into the meet, kind of a get here now moment where you shift away from you were folding laundry for your mother and siblings and it's crowded in your house and like, okay, now I'm putting on, you know, my learning persona, which is a difficult shift for some, right? And it's sometimes constant. They have a work persona, a home persona, and it's hard. But that giving that kind of space to students, then they're gonna look forward to seeing you and seeing one another, and maybe the learning activities that are allowing them to discover how they think, what learning motivates them, what content is interesting to them. And then they're discovering themselves and the educational process. And that's where I think somebody said, you know, we're a place of hope. I think that's where like the university is doing its job again. And the interaction is going to build that. I can't emphasize that enough.
There was an app that disappeared. I forgot what it's called, but I used to stalk it a little bit after I heard about it, and it really was for students to kind of interact amongst themselves, and they didn't think that faculty and staff would be looking in. One of the things I saw a lot was about lack of community opportunities on campus here at East Bay. And so that was something that they were looking for and couldn't necessarily find it a lot. And so it's important for them to have some access to community.
Yeah, it's something that as counseling, we're really teaching to, especially our incoming new students during orientation, is that they'll need to be intentional about things that used to just happen, right? But especially forming connection and forming community. They need to be intentional about that. I think we as instructors need to be intentional about forming that in our classrooms. And I love what Jessica was saying of just taking every opportunity we have to allow students to build relationship, build community among each other, because it's not happening as easily, as naturally as it would. And I also think that's true. I saw in the chat, somebody was asking about how about for us, you know, like it is really frustrating to try and figure out how to be a good instructor during a pandemic online when I really, you know, get energized and love being able to interact with my students, right? And so I think that we need to be real about how this is affecting us as well and do some of the things that we're encouraging students to do. And that's why I say model and assign self-care, assign it to yourself as well, but also to be intentional about forming community. You know, this cohort is a great example of just people that you are seeing in the chat are feeling the same things that you're feeling, and you can reach out to them and talk with them, even if you can't solve it, but just to say, I'm super frustrated. Are there creative ways that you're finding to connect with your students? And think about, you know, community opportunities at East Bay, such as like staff and faculty affinity groups. If anybody's interested in being a part, for example, of the Asian Pacific Islander affinity group, I would love to have you. Let me know. I'll put you on our list. We have a lot of people and we have a lot of different discussions and community building activities. I think now more than ever, you know, the African American Faculty Staff Association, the LGBTQ Faculty Staff Association, the Chicano Latinx Faculty Staff Association. These are great opportunities to get out of our departments and create more community for ourselves so that we can support each other through this strange time. So be intentional and thoughtful about what are the things that you might not normally feel like you have time for, but right now feel very, very needful for yourself personally.
And there's also the White Anti-Racist Collective that just began as well.
I have a question. Yeah. So I think that idea of community and things, you know, community spaces that are happening in the online setting, I think also, I don't think it was perfect before the pandemic. It wasn't, there was suddenly these, you know, flourishing communities and so on before the pandemic. Anyway, so I'm interested, I'm just wondering, you know, there was a lot of community, but it's not fair to say that it was, you know, perfect before the pandemic. So I'm just wondering if there's a space where examples of where students are able to form positive communities can be shared. So if there's a you know, an experience that say one instructor is having or something that's happening among communities of students, whether that experience can be shared so that we might emulate those or, you know, use those examples in our own teaching as well.
I would say to that, and this is more of a faculty-student interaction in terms of creating relationship and community. Many of the students, you know, have explained to me or expressed, where's our faculty? We don't see them outside of the classroom. So, you know, there's a program called Black at the Bay that happens at the beginning of every year. I don't know if it's going to happen virtually this year, but if you look around their room, you rarely see faculty that show up for that. Students are watching us to see literally our actions, how we show up, how we show care, how we show that we see you, we want to be engaged with you. And there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that. It's just, and you know, I know there's basic that can get a little bit crazy in terms of all the things that are happening, but there's a lot of opportunity for interaction. And like the faculty staff associations, as Shana said, they were in existence. They've always offered spaces to be. They all meet monthly. It's just whether or not we have the will to engage. And if those aren't spaces that resonate with you, you can create those spaces. Pascal and Nazi have created the ABC group. That's more activist in nature, but it's, I think, very much a community where they're trying to get things done. So if it doesn't exist, you are more than welcome to create it.